My name is Margaret Linden, just your average retired librarian. After 36 years surrounded by books and the hushed whispers of readers at the county library, I thought I knew what quiet felt like. But there's a different kind of quiet that comes when your own daughter tells the world you've lost your mind. A silence that rings in your ears when family members stop calling because they believe you're sliding into dementia. And then there's the deafening stillness when you're sitting alone, finger hovering over the play button, knowing the recordings you're about to share will shatter the lies she's built around you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd need evidence to prove my sanity. I certainly never imagined my own flesh and blood would be the one I needed to defend myself against. But that's the thing about family. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. It started 3 years ago when my husband Richard passed away. 52 years we had together. Not all of it easy, not all of it perfect, but it was ours. He was a civil engineer, methodical in everything he did. Measure twice, cut once, he'd say, not just about wood or concrete, but about decisions, about life. When pancreatic cancer took him in just 4 months, the foundation of my world crumbled. Grief does strange things to a person. For me, it was like moving through molasses. Simple tasks, making coffee, sorting mail, calling the insurance company, felt monumental. My daughter Elaine noticed, of course. She'd always been observant, even as a child. Sometimes too observant. "Mom, you're not doing well on your own," she said one Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after Richard died. She'd driven up from Columbus to visit me in my little house in Meadowbrook, Ohio. A small town where everybody knows everybody, for better or worse. "I'm managing," I told her, though the laundry had piled up and I'd been eating cereal for dinner more often than not. "Managing isn't living," she said, settling into Richard's old armchair, the blue one with the slight indentation, that had formed over decades of him reading the evening paper there. "I'm worried about you." Her concern seemed genuine. Her voice was soft, her eyes, so like her father's, warm with empathy. I've always been proud of Elaine. Smart as a whip, graduated top of her class, built her own accounting business from scratch. She'd married Thomas, a real estate developer, and they had my only grandchild, Emma, now 15 and already talking about medical school. What mother doesn't want to believe in her child's good intentions? "I've been thinking," Elaine continued, "the house is too big for you now. All these stairs, the yard work, you don't need the stress." I looked around at the home Richard and I had saved for, had built our lives in, the kitchen where we'd danced, on our 25th anniversary, slightly drunk on cheap champagne. The backyard where we'd planted an oak tree when Elaine was born, now tall and strong, shading half the garden. "This is my home," I said simply. "It's full of memories, Mom. Sometimes, holding on too tight to the past makes it harder to move forward." It sounded reasonable when she said it like that. It sounded like she cared. So when she suggested I sell the house and move into an annex they were building on their property in Columbus, "Just a small place of your own, but we'd be right there, if you needed anything," I found myself considering it. The thought of being closer to Emma was appealing, and I was tired, so tired of waking up to an empty bed, of cooking meals for one. "You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance," Elaine said. "No more property taxes, no more lawn care, and the market is great right now. This place would sell for at least $320,000. That number hung in the air between us, my home reduced to a dollar figure. I'd have to think about it, I replied. Elaine smiled, patted my hand. Of course, Mom, there's no rush. But there was, apparently. Over the next few weeks, Elaine called daily. She sent emails with listings of homes that had sold in my neighborhood. She had Thomas drop by with paperwork for a real estate agent, just to get an appraisal, no commitment. I began to feel pressured, but I kept telling myself this was what caring family did. They looked out for each other. And maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to downsize. Then came the day Elaine brought a woman named Patricia Weston to my house. She's a friend from college who specializes in elder law, Elaine explained. Patricia wore a charcoal gray suit and had the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She carried a leather portfolio filled with documents. I've, just brought a few standard forms, Patricia said, spreading papers across my dining room table. Power of attorney, healthcare directive, that sort of thing. Everyone should have these in place. I'd had a will since Richard and I first had Elaine. I'd updated it after he died, but Elaine insisted these additional documents were necessary, just to make sure everything's covered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something didn't feel right. Maybe it was the way Elaine kept exchanging glances with Patricia when they thought I wasn't looking. Or the way Patricia kept using phrases like, when you're no longer able to make decisions for yourself, rather than, if. Can I take these to review? I asked, gathering the papers. Elaine's smile tightened. There's really nothing complicated here, Mom. It's just standard language. Still, I'd like to read them thoroughly. Richard always said never to sign anything without understanding every word. Dad's not here anymore, Elaine said sharply. Then, softening her tone, I'm just trying to help you avoid lawyer fees. Patricia's doing us a favor. I stood my ground. I'll look them over and get back to you. After they left, I spread the documents across the same table and read every word. The power of attorney wasn't the standard form I expected. It was extensive, immediate rather than springing, and would give Elaine complete control over all my financial decisions, not just in the event of incapacity but effective immediately upon signing. The healthcare directive included language about memory care facilities and cognitive decline treatments. There was even a form authorizing Elaine to act as my representative payee for Social Security benefits. I was stunned. These weren't documents to protect me in case of future incapacity. These were documents to transfer control of my life and finances to my daughter now, while I was still perfectly capable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Richard, about what he would advise. Trust, but verify, he used to say when reviewing contracts for work, so I decided to verify. The next morning, I called Paul Hendricks, an attorney who had been Richard's friend since college. I explained the situation and asked if he would review the documents. Bring them over, he said without hesitation. I'll take a look. Paul's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, with creaky wooden floors and shelves lined with legal texts. He read through the papers while I sat across from his desk, trying not to fidget. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. Margaret, I'm glad you brought these to me. These aren't standard documents. This power of attorney would essentially give your daughter complete control over your assets. She could sell your house, access your bank accounts, even make investment decisions without your consent or knowledge. My stomach dropped. But that can't be legal, can it? Unfortunately, it is. if you sign it. He leaned forward. Margaret, is there a reason Elaine might be pushing for this level of control? I thought about the house, worth $320,000 according to Elaine, about my savings from decades of careful living, the life insurance policy from Richard. All told, my assets were substantial for someone who had lived a modest life as a librarian. She's been very focused on getting me to sell the house, I admitted. Paul nodded slowly. I think you need to be careful here. Don't sign anything yet. And if you don't mind, I'd like to suggest you see someone. A doctor, I said flatly. It would be helpful to have an official evaluation of your cognitive function. Not because I think there's anything wrong, he added quickly, seeing my expression, but because it would establish a record that you're of sound mind. It felt humiliating, but I agreed. Better to be proactive than reactive, as Richard would say. Dr. Bennett at the Meadowbrook Medical Center was kind and thorough. She administered a series of cognitive tests, asking me to remember sequences of numbers, identify patterns, recall details from stories she read to me. I passed everything with flying colors. Mrs. Linden, your cognitive function is absolutely normal for someone your age, she said after scoring the tests. Better than normal, actually. Your verbal recall is excellent. I asked her to document her findings officially. She seemed curious but didn't pry, simply nodding and saying she would prepare a formal report. Armed with Dr. Bennett's evaluation and Paul's legal advice, I felt more confident when Elaine called to ask about the documents. I've had them reviewed, I told her. I won't be signing them as they are. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You don't trust me, she said, her voice thin with hurt. It's not about trust, Elaine. It's about maintaining my independence while I'm still perfectly capable. Mom, you haven't been the same since Dad died. You're forgetful, you get confused. Last time I visited, you couldn't find your glasses and they were on top of your head. I almost laughed. That happens to everyone, not just old people. You left the stove on overnight. That happened once over a month ago. See, you don't even remember. It was 2 weeks ago and it could have burned the house down. I was certain it had been longer, but I felt a flicker of doubt. Had it been 2 weeks? Was I misremembering? Either way, I said, I've been evaluated by Dr. Bennett, and she says my cognitive function is normal. Another silence. You went to a doctor behind my back? I didn't realize I needed your permission to see my own doctor? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Elaine said, her voice rising. You're paranoid, Mom. You're seeing threats where there's only love and concern. The conversation deteriorated from there. By the time we hung up, we were both upset, and nothing had been resolved. That night, after a cup of chamomile tea that did little to calm my nerves, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Richard had always been the tech-savvy one in our relationship, but I'd learned enough over the years to get by. I searched for information about elder financial abuse and was disturbed by what I found. Stories of adult children pressuring parents to sign over assets, of elders being declared incompetent so others could control their finances, of homes sold and savings drained. It was while reading these accounts that I had a thought. If Elaine was going to claim I was losing my mental faculties, I needed more than just one doctor's evaluation. I needed ongoing proof that I was lucid and aware. I remembered how Richard had recorded important phone calls when working on sensitive projects. People's memories are unreliable, he'd say. Records don't lie. The next day, I drove to the electronics store and purchased a digital voice recorder, small enough to fit in my pocket. I also bought a new cell phone with a recording app, and I learned how to use the voice memo function on my computer. I didn't plan to record every interaction, just the ones with Elaine and anyone else involved in this situation. Ohio law only required one party's consent for recordings, and I would be that party. It felt strange, almost Machiavellian, to be preparing this way against my own daughter. But something in my gut told me I needed protection. A week later, Elaine came to visit again, this time with Thomas. The recorder was in my cardigan pocket, quietly capturing every word. "Mom, we've been thinking," Elaine began after I'd served. "Coffee in the good china cups, the ones I usually saved for special occasions. It might be easier if we simplified things. Instead of building the annex, why don't you just move in with us? We have that guest room on the first floor. It would be yours." Thomas nodded earnestly. "We're hardly ever home during the day anyway. You'd have the place to yourself most of the time." The guest room. Their guest room with the pull-out sofa and the boxes of Christmas decorations stacked in the closet. That was what they were offering me in exchange for my home of 40 years. "What about the annex you were planning to build?" I asked. "Well, with construction costs these days." Thomas glanced at Elaine. "It just makes more financial sense this way." Financial sense, not emotional sense, not comfort sense. Financial sense. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I think I'd prefer to stay in my own home for now." Elaine set her cup down with a sharp clink. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too much for you." "I manage just fine. I have a cleaning service. Twice a month, and the neighbor's son mows the lawn." "But the stairs," Elaine pressed. "What if you fall? You could lie there for days before anyone found you." "I could fall in your guest room too," I pointed out, "and I have my emergency alert button." I tapped the pendant I wore around my neck, another of Richard's practical preparations. The conversation went back and forth like this, with Elaine, growing increasingly frustrated and me becoming increasingly certain that staying in my home was the right decision. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Margaret, we're just concerned. Lately, Elaine's noticed some concerning behaviors." "What behaviors?" I asked. Elaine jumped in. "You called Emma Elaine last time we visited. You forgot Aunt Susan's birthday. You complained about missing money from your wallet, but then we found it in the freezer." I frowned. "I did not put money in the freezer." "See? You don't even remember." Elaine looked at Thomas triumphantly. "This is what I've been dealing with." I wanted to argue, but doubt crept in again. Had I confused names? Had I forgotten Susan's birthday? I couldn't remember any incident with money in the freezer. But what if it had happened and I'd forgotten? No. I shook my head. I would remember something that bizarre. I was forgetful sometimes, yes, but not to that extent. "I think I need some time to consider everything," I said, standing to signal the visit was over. After they left, I played back the recording. Hearing the conversation again was illuminating. I noticed how Elaine introduced new supposed incidents of my forgetfulness each time I countered her previous examples. I heard the strategic way Thomas backed her up, adding weight to her claims. Most tellingly, I heard my own voice, clear, coherent, logical. Not the voice of someone sliding into dementia. I made more recordings over the next few weeks. Phone calls with Elaine, a visit from her and Patricia Weston, who brought revised documents that were only slightly less controlling than the originals. a conversation with Thomas about investment opportunities for the money I would get from selling my house. Each time I listened to the recordings afterward, analyzing the interactions, I began to see a pattern. Elaine would mention my declining health or memory issues to someone, then use their concerned reaction as further evidence that I needed help. She was building a narrative of my incompetence, brick by brick. Then came the family reunion, at my sister Jean's house in Cincinnati. I hadn't planned to record it. It was supposed to be a happy occasion, a chance to see relatives from across the country. But when I arrived, the atmosphere was strange. People gave me concerned looks. My cousin Ruth hugged me too long, too tight, and said, "How are you really doing, Margaret?" with such pointed emphasis that I knew something was wrong. During lunch, I overheard my nephew Michael asking Elaine if Aunt Margaret is really as bad as you said. I couldn't hear her response, but his sympathetic head shaking told me everything. After dessert, my brother-in-law Pete took me aside. "Listen, Margaret, Jean and I have been talking. If you need somewhere to stay while you sort things out with Elaine, our door is always open." "Sort what out?" I asked. Pete looked uncomfortable. "Well, the situation with the house and your health concerns." That's when I understood. Elaine had been talking to the entire family. She'd been spreading her story that I was mentally unfit. I slipped away to the bathroom and turned on my recorder. When I returned to the party, I made a point of engaging in conversations, asking specific questions about people's lives, reminiscing about shared memories with exact details. I wanted the recording to capture my lucidity, my intact memory. On the drive home, I felt sick with betrayal. My own daughter was actively undermining me to our entire family. For what? Control of my assets, the chance to sell my house and use the money for her own purposes? I needed to understand the extent of what I was dealing with. The next day, I called my bank and discovered Elaine had been inquiring about my accounts, claiming she was helping me manage my finances. She'd even asked about adding her name, though thankfully the bank required my in-person signature for that. I called my doctor's office and learned Elaine had requested copies of my medical records, citing concerns about my cognitive decline. The office had refused without my written consent. I checked my mail more carefully and found a glossy brochure for a memory care community that I initially thought was just junk mail. Inside was a note in Elaine's handwriting. "Something to think about, Mom. They have openings." The community, a bland-looking facility on the outskirts of Columbus, cost $6,500 per month, far more than my pension and Social Security combined. The only way I could afford it would be to sell my home. Everything clicked into place. Elaine wanted me to sell the house, move in with her temporarily, and then, once the money was accessible, and she had control through the power of attorney, she planned to put me in this facility. My assets would cover the cost for a while, and then what? Would she even visit once the money ran out? I felt cold, then hot with anger. How long had she been planning this? Had she ever actually intended to build that annex? Had her concern ever been genuine, or was it all about the money? I didn't want to believe my daughter capable of such calculated deception. I searched my memories for signs I might have missed, clues to a change in her character. Had Thomas influenced her? Had financial troubles pushed her to desperate measures? Or had she always been this way, and I'd been too blinded by maternal love to see it? I went through our recent interactions, trying to pinpoint when things shifted. There had been tensions in the past. Elaine had always been somewhat controlling, somewhat dismissive of my opinions. but nothing that suggested she would go this far. What I did remember was a conversation from about a year ago, shortly after Richard died. Elaine and Thomas had wanted to invest in a new real estate development, a sure thing, according to Thomas. They'd asked if we could lend them $200,000 for the initial investment. Richard and I had always been cautious with money. We believed in saving, in living within our means. I'd told Elaine no, explaining that I needed security in my retirement, especially now that I was on my own. She'd been angry, accusing me of not trusting them, of not supporting her dreams. "Dad would have helped me," she'd said, a particularly painful barb. Was that the turning point? Had my refusal to fund their investment sparked this elaborate scheme to access my assets anyway? I didn't want to jump to conclusions. There could be an explanation, something I was missing. Maybe Elaine truly believed I was declining? Maybe her concerns, however misguided, were genuine. I decided to confront her directly, one last time, before taking more drastic measures. I invited her to dinner at my house, just the two of us. I prepared Richard's lasagna recipe, set the table with care, and placed my recorder in the center of the table, in plain view. When Elaine arrived, her eyes immediately went to the device. "What's that?" "A recorder," I said, gesturing for her to sit. I thought we should both have a record of this conversation. She remained standing, her handbag clutched tightly against her side. "Why would we need to record anything?" "Because I want clarity, Elaine. I want to understand exactly what's happening here." "Nothing's happening. I'm just trying to help you." I pressed the record button, the small red light blinking to life. "Tell me about the memory care facility you left a brochure for, the one that costs $6,500 a month." Elaine's face flushed. "It's a nice place. I've toured it. I thought it might be good to have options." "Options for what?" "I've been evaluated by Dr. Bennett and found to be cognitively normal." "One evaluation doesn't mean anything. You could be having a good day." "I've had cognitive assessments 3 times in the last 2 months. All normal." She blinked. 3 times? "Yes. And I've been keeping a journal documenting my daily activities, my medication management, my bill payments. Everything to establish that I'm functioning perfectly well on my own." Elaine shifted her weight, glancing at the recorder again. "Mom, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I'm worried about. Recording conversations, getting multiple medical opinions when you don't need them." "Let's talk about the power of attorney documents," I interrupted. "The ones that would give you immediate and complete control over my finances." She looked away. "Those are standard. Anyone my age with aging parents sets those up." "No, they're not standard. I've had them reviewed by Paul Hendricks. They're excessive and unnecessary for someone in my condition." "Paul Hendricks?" Elaine's voice rose. "Dad's old drinking buddy? He's hardly impartial. He's a respected elder law attorney, and he was concerned enough to advise me to be cautious." We went back and forth like this, the red light blinking steadily as we spoke. Elaine alternated between defensiveness and counterattacks, accusing me of being paranoid, of not trusting her, of embarrassing her in front of family by acting erratic. Finally, I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Elaine, is this about the money I wouldn't loan you and Thomas for that real estate development?" She went very still. "What? No. That was a completely different issue." But her eyes slid away from mine, and I knew. Maybe it wasn't the only reason, but it was part of it. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. "Mom, please go. I need some time to think. After Elaine left, the house fell into a silence so complete I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The one Richard had restored the summer before Emma was born. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the lasagna cooling, untouched on the table, feeling a strange mix of clarity and devastation. The recorder still blinked its steady red light, faithfully capturing nothing but the sound of my own measured breathing. I pressed stop and rewound the conversation, listening to the entire exchange. Hearing it played back made everything more real. The careful evasions, the subtle gaslighting, the way Elaine had tried to make me doubt my own perceptions. "Enough," I said aloud to the empty room. My voice didn't waver. That night, I made a pot of Earl Grey tea, Richard's favorite, and sat at my small writing desk by the window. Outside, the street lamps cast pools of amber light on the sidewalk where Elaine had learned to ride her bicycle, where I'd taught her to identify maple trees by their leaves, where we'd walked hand in hand to her first day of kindergarten. I spread out a legal pad and began to make a list. All the incidents Elaine had claimed were evidence of my mental decline, all the times she'd spoken to others about my supposed condition without my knowledge, all the attempts to gain control of my finances. Next to this, I listed the evidence I had gathered: recordings of our conversations, Dr. Bennett's evaluations, notes from my meeting with Paul Hendricks, bank records showing Elaine's inquiries, the memory care facility brochure with its $6,500 monthly fee prominently displayed. The pattern, laid out in black and white, was undeniable. By midnight, I had formulated a plan. Not a plan for revenge. I took no pleasure in the thought of exposing my daughter's deception, but a plan for protection, self-preservation. I would not be stripped of my autonomy, my home, or my dignity. The next morning, I called Jean. "Margaret," she answered, her voice laced with that same careful concern I'd heard at the family reunion. "How are you feeling?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied calmly. "But I need to talk to you and Pete about something important. Can I come over tomorrow?" "Of course, but—" "Not on the phone," I interrupted gently. "This needs to be in person." Jean hesitated. "Should I call Elaine? Maybe she should be there too." "No," I said firmly. "Just us. For now." I made similar calls to my brother Howard and his wife Deborah, and to my cousin Ruth. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Their initial concern, my calm insistence on an in-person meeting, their uncertainty about excluding Elaine, my gentle but firm refusal to include her. By the end of the day, I had arranged to meet with the key members of my family over the course of the next week. I didn't tell them what the meetings were about, only that it was important and private. That night, I received a text from Elaine. "Aunt Jean called me. Why are you meeting with her without telling me? This is exactly the secretive behavior I'm worried about." I didn't respond. Instead, I backed up all my recordings to both a cloud service and a physical flash drive. I organized my documentation into a binder with tabbed sections. I made copies of everything. The first meeting was with Jean and Pete at their home in Cincinnati. I drove there myself, another small act of independence that felt significant. When I arrived, Jean hugged me tightly, her eyes scanning my face as if looking for signs of confusion or distress. "Come in," she said. "I've made your favorite lemon bars." The three of us settled in Jean's sunroom, surrounded by her collection of African violets, their purple and pink blooms nodding in the gentle breeze from the ceiling fan. Pete offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. The drive had been long and I needed to be alert for what came next. "So," Jean began after we'd exchanged pleasantries, "what's this all about, Margaret? You've got us worried." I placed my binder on the coffee table between us and my recorder beside it. "I'm going to record our conversation, if that's all right. For accuracy." Jean and Pete exchanged a glance. "Of course," Pete said slowly. "But why?" "I need to play something for you first," I said, pulling out my phone. "This is a conversation I had with Elaine 2 days ago." I played the recording of our last dinner, stopping occasionally to explain context or point out specific inconsistencies in Elaine's statements. Jean's expression shifted from concern to confusion to dawning horror as the recording continued. When it finished, I opened the binder and began methodically going through the evidence I had gathered. Dr. Bennett's evaluations, Paul Hendrick's analysis of the power of attorney documents, the bank records, the memory care facility brochure. "Oh, Margaret," Jean whispered when I finished. "I had no idea. Elaine told us you were having significant memory problems, that you were becoming paranoid, that she was trying to help you, but you were resisting care. She told us you'd been leaving the stove on, wandering outside in your nightgown, hiding money around the house and then forgetting where you put it," Pete added. I shook my head. "None of that happened. Not once." "We believed her," Jean said, tears welling in her eyes. She sounded so concerned, so genuine. "She's always been convincing," I acknowledged. "Even as a child, she could talk her way out of anything. Richard used to say she'd make either a brilliant lawyer or a con artist." The memory, once fond, now carried a bitter aftertaste. "But why?" Pete asked. "I don't understand why she would do this." I explained about the real estate investment, about the value of my house, about the way Elaine and Thomas had been pushing for me to sell and move in with them. "Money," Jean said flatly. "She's doing this for money." "I think so," I agreed. "Or at least that's part of it. There might be more to it. Control, perhaps. Elaine has always liked things done her way." We talked for hours. Jean and Pete were horrified, apologetic, angry on my behalf. They promised to support me, to speak. To the rest of the family, to help correct the false narrative Elaine had been spreading. As I was leaving, Jean hugged me again, this time with a fierceness that reminded me of our childhood scuffles. "I'm so sorry I doubted you," she whispered. "You couldn't have known," I assured her. "She's my daughter. Even I didn't want to believe it at first." My meetings with Howard and Deborah, and then with Ruth, followed similar patterns. Initial skepticism gave way to shock as they listened to the recordings and reviewed the evidence. Each of them had been told stories about my supposed decline. Each had been unwittingly recruited into Elaine's campaign to paint me as incompetent. By the end of the week, my closest family members knew the truth. I felt both relieved and deeply sad. The relief came from being believed, from having allies in my corner. The sadness came from confirming the extent of Elaine's deception and the realization that our relationship might never recover. Throughout this time, Elaine continued to text and call, her messages growing increasingly frantic as she presumably heard from other family members. I didn't respond. I needed space to process my emotions, to grieve the daughter I thought I had. Instead, I focused on practical matters. I scheduled an appointment with Paul Hendricks to update my will and create legitimate, reasonable advance directives. I arranged for regular cognitive assessments with Dr. Bennett to maintain a record of my mental acuity. I set up a system of financial safeguards, including alerts for unusual activities on my accounts. I wasn't just protecting myself from Elaine. I was creating a framework that would preserve my autonomy as I aged, regardless of who might try to undermine it. 3 weeks after I had shown Jean and Pete the evidence, my doorbell rang on a Wednesday afternoon. I was repotting an orchid. In the kitchen, my hands covered in soil. Through the window, I could see Thomas's silver Audi in my driveway. I washed my hands slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to prepare. When I opened the door, Elaine stood on the porch alone, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I considered turning her away. Part of me wanted to, but another part, the part that had nursed her through chickenpox and helped her with science fair projects, and applauded until my hands hurt at her college graduation, couldn't do it. I stepped aside silently. She walked into the living room, but remained standing, clutching her purse like a shield. "Aunt Jean called me," she said without preamble. "So did Uncle Howard and Ruth." I nodded but said nothing. "You've been recording me." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And showing the recordings to our family." "Yes." She swallowed hard. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "Can you explain why you told everyone I was wandering the streets in my nightgown when that never happened? Can you explain why you tried to get power of attorney over all my assets when I'm perfectly competent? Can you explain the memory care facility brochure with the $6,500 monthly fee that would have drained my savings in a matter of years?" Elaine flinched at each question, but her chin came up defiantly. "You're twisting everything. I was concerned about you. Maybe I exaggerated some things to get the family to understand how serious it was, but I was trying to help. Help yourself. To my house, you mean. That's unfair. You're alone here, it's not safe. Stop." I held up a hand. "Just stop, Elaine. I have the recordings. I have the documents. I have the evidence." She fell silent, her eyes darting around the room, as if looking for an escape. I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. What happened to you? When did you become someone who would do this to her own mother? Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another performance. It's not. She struggled to find words. "Things aren't good with Thomas and me. Financially, I mean. That development deal went bad after you wouldn't help us. We lost a lot of money. The business is struggling. Emma wants to go to Princeton and the tuition. So you decided to solve your problems with my money? With my house? I was going to take care of you. In a memory care facility that costs more than I could afford, while you lived in my house or pocketed the proceeds from selling it?" She didn't answer directly. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Thomas's parents are always talking about how they helped his sister buy her house, how they paid for their grandchildren's education. They look down on me because I can't provide the same for Emma." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. I knew what it was like to feel judged, to worry about measuring up. But then I remembered the recordings, the lies, the methodical way she had tried to undermine my independence. I understand pressure, Elaine. I understand financial stress. What I don't understand is deception. You could have talked to me honestly. You could have asked for help without trying to take over my life. Would you have helped? She shot back. You already said no to the investment. The investment was risky, as you've just admitted. But if you'd come to me about Emma's education, about legitimate financial needs, yes, I would have considered it. I might not have given you everything you wanted, but I would have listened. Right, she said bitterly. You would have considered it, with all sorts of conditions and judgments attached. I shook my head, realizing how deep the gulf between us had become. This conversation isn't productive. I think you should go. So that's it? You're just cutting me off because I made some mistakes? Mistakes? I echoed. Elaine, you systematically tried to have me declared incompetent. You spread lies about my mental health to our entire family. You attempted to gain control of all my assets under false pretenses. Those aren't mistakes. They're calculated actions. I'm still your daughter, she said, a note of desperation entering her voice. Yes, I agreed softly. And that's the only reason we're having this conversation instead of one with the police. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't? No, I wouldn't. Because despite everything, I love you, but I don't trust you anymore. And until that changes, we need boundaries. What kind of boundaries? For starters, you won't have access to my financial information. You won't be involved in my medical decisions. You won't have a key to my house. And you'll need to correct the false narrative you've spread about my mental health with everyone you've spoken to. She stared at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mom, please. This isn't a negotiation, Elaine. These are the consequences of your actions. She left shortly after, shoulders slumped in defeat, or perhaps just in the temporary retreat of someone who hasn't truly accepted they were wrong. I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was perhaps the most painful part of all. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The oak tree Richard and I had planted when Elaine was born cast a long shadow across the lawn. 38 rings in that trunk. 38 years of growth, of storms weathered, of roots deepening. I thought about roots and family trees, about how the people who share our blood can sometimes be the ones who hurt us most deeply. I thought about trust broken, and whether it could ever be fully repaired. My phone buzzed with text messages from Jean, from Howard, from Ruth, all checking in, all offering support. I had allies. I wasn't alone. The next day, I called Emma. She was 17 now, old enough to understand some version of what had happened, old enough to make her own decisions about her relationship with me. I didn't disparage Elaine or Thomas. I simply said there had been some adult disagreements about my living situation and finances, and that I wanted Emma to know my door was always open to her. Is that why Mom's been crying in her room? Emma asked. Probably, I admitted. We're going through a difficult time. She said you were sick, like mentally sick, that you were forgetting things and needed help. I took a deep breath. I'm not sick, Emma. I've had multiple cognitive evaluations, and I'm fine for someone my age. I kind of figured, she said with the blunt clarity of youth. Last time we visited, you remembered all my friends' names and my exact class schedule. Mom can't even remember if I have AP chemistry on B days or C days. Despite everything, I laughed. Well, I was a librarian. Keeping track of details was my job for a long time. We talked a while longer. She told me about her college applications, about the boy she liked in her calculus class, about the volunteer work she was doing at an animal shelter. Normal teenage things, blessedly free of the adult complications that had consumed my recent weeks. Before we hung up, she said, Grandma, I'll still come visit you, okay? Even if Mom and Dad don't. I'd like that very much, I told her, my heart aching with a complicated mixture of gratitude and sadness. Over the next month, I fell into a new routine. Morning coffee with the newspaper on the porch if the weather was good. Volunteering at the library 3 days a week, helping with their digitization project. Dinner with Jean and Pete every Sunday. Weekly phone calls with Emma. Elaine didn't contact me again, though Thomas sent a terse email requesting the return of some items they had stored in my attic. I arranged for him to pick them up when I was out volunteering, leaving the boxes on the porch with a neighbor watching from across the street, just in case. Then, 6 weeks after our confrontation, I received a large manila envelope in the mail. Inside was a formal letter of apology from Elaine, acknowledging her inappropriate actions regarding my finances and health. Also included were copies of emails she had sent to family members, retracting her previous claims about my mental state and admitting she had exaggerated concerns for personal reasons. The apology felt rehearsed, possibly even legally advised. But it was something. At the bottom of the envelope was a handwritten note on Elaine's personal stationery. "Mom, I know words aren't enough. I'm seeing a therapist to understand why I did what I did. I'm ashamed. If you ever want to talk, I'm... Here, love, Elaine." I placed the note in my desk drawer, not ready to respond, but not willing to throw it away either. The recordings that had saved my autonomy remained on my phone, on my computer, on a flash drive in my fireproof lockbox. I didn't listen to them anymore, but their existence gave me peace of mind, a shield against any future attempts to question my competence. More importantly, they had given me back my voice when others tried to silence it. They had provided irrefutable evidence of my truth when doubt was cast upon my words. As I walked through my garden one morning in late spring, pruning the rose bushes Richard and I had planted decades ago, I reflected on resilience. The roses had survived harsh winters, periods of drought, even an infestation of aphids last summer. They had bent, but not broken. They had endured. So had I. Summer arrived with a warmth that seemed to seep into my bones, easing the lingering ache that had settled there during the confrontation with Elaine. I found myself spending more time outdoors, tending to the garden Richard had once lovingly designed. The physical labor, turning soil, pruning branches, weeding between stone pavers, became a kind of therapy. Each afternoon spent under the sun left me tired but satisfied, my mind quieter, my purpose clearer. The hydrangeas were particularly vibrant that year, their blue and purple blooms nodding heavily in the breeze. Richard had planted them on our 20th anniversary, saying they reminded him of my eyes, changeable, depending on the light. I'd rolled my eyes at his sentimentality then, but now I treasured the memory, watering those bushes with special care. "They're magnificent," said Harriet from next door, leaning over the fence one evening as I deadheaded spent blooms. Harriet was new to the neighborhood, a retired nurse who'd moved in 6 months ago after her husband died. We'd developed a casual friendship over shared gardening tips and occasional cups of tea. "The secret is coffee grounds," I told her, setting my clippers down. "Richard used to save them all year. The acidity makes the blues more intense." "Smart man, you're Richard." She tilted her head, studying me with the direct gaze of someone accustomed to assessing patients. "You seem stronger these days, Margaret. There's a solidity to you that wasn't there when we first met." I considered her observation, surprised by its accuracy. I did feel more solid, more firmly rooted in my own being. "I've weathered a storm," I said simply. "Well, you've come through it. Beautifully." She gestured toward my flower beds. Like these plants after a good rain. Sometimes we need the hard times to really flourish. Her words stayed with me as I went inside to wash up for dinner. Had the conflict with Elaine, painful as it was, somehow strengthened me? I wouldn't have chosen it, certainly. But there was no denying that standing up for myself, gathering evidence, presenting my case methodically to my family, all of it had awakened something within me that had been dormant for too long. My phone rang as I was drying my hands. It was Emma. "Grandma," she said without preamble, "I got accepted to Princeton. Early decision." "Oh, Emma!" Joy bubbled up in me, momentarily washing away all other concerns. "I'm so proud of you. Your hard work paid off." "It's not just Princeton," she continued, her words tumbling out in excitement. "They're offering me a merit scholarship that covers half the tuition. And I got that research internship for the summer, the one with the marine biology lab in Florida." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. Emma had always been brilliant, focused in a way Elaine never was. "Have you told your parents yet?" There was a slight pause. "Yeah, they're happy about Princeton, but not so much about Florida. It's too far away, they say. And even with the scholarship, they're worried about affording the other half of tuition." I said nothing, waiting. Emma had always been perceptive. She would read between the lines of my silence. "Mom mentioned asking you for help," she said. Finally. But I told her I wouldn't let her do that. Not after. Everything. So Emma knew more than I'd realized about the situation between Elaine and me. "That's mature of you," I acknowledged. "But your education is important." "I can take out loans for the rest," she said firmly. "Lots of students do." I thought about the substantial savings I'd set aside over the years, money that had once been earmarked for dividing between Elaine and any grandchildren, money that I'd been particularly protective of when Elaine and Thomas had wanted it for their risky investment. "How about this?" I proposed carefully. "I'll set up a separate education account for you. The money will go directly toward your tuition and expenses, not through your parents." "Grandma, no, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm offering. And I'll be honest, Emma, I'd planned to leave you something in my will anyway. This way I get to see you benefit from it now, when you need it most." I paused, then added, "We can keep it between us if you prefer." "No," she said after a moment's consideration. "No, I think Mom should know. It might help her." "I don't understand some things." I wasn't sure what Emma meant by that, but I sensed a wisdom beyond her years, a desire to perhaps bridge the gap that had formed in our family. "All right," I agreed. "You tell her when and how you think best." We talked a while longer about her plans, about how excited she was for this next chapter. Before hanging up, she said, "Grandma, I was thinking maybe I could come stay with you for a week or two before I go to Florida. Would that be okay?" My heart swelled. "More than okay, sweetheart. I'd love that." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, turning my teacup in slow circles. Emma's visit would be the first real test of the new boundaries I'd established, with Elaine. Would she object? Try to prevent it? Use it as an excuse to insert herself back into my life without addressing the underlying issues? I decided not to borrow trouble. Whatever came, I would handle it with the same clarity and evidence-based approach that had served me well so far. The next day, I called Paul Hendricks and arranged to set up an educational trust for Emma. We structured it carefully, ensuring the money could only be used for tuition, books, housing, and other legitimate educational expenses. It would be enough to cover what her scholarship didn't, plus graduate school, if she chose to continue her education. "This is generous, Margaret," Paul said as we finalized the paperwork. "Are you sure you don't want to set aside anything for Elaine as well?" I shook my head. "Not now. Maybe someday if things change. But right now, the trust needs to be unassailable. No room for manipulation or redirection of funds." Paul nodded, understanding the subtext. "How are things between you two?" "Distant," I admitted. "She sent a formal apology, but we haven't spoken directly. I'm not ready." "And that's perfectly fine," he assured me. "Trust takes time to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. You're protecting yourself, which is exactly what you should be doing." As I left his office, I found myself thinking about trust, how easily it could be damaged, how painstakingly it must be reconstructed, like a fine piece of porcelain, once shattered, never quite the same even when glued back together. But perhaps that was the wrong metaphor. Perhaps trust was more like my garden, able to recover from damage, to grow again with proper care, sometimes even stronger for having been pruned back to essentials. The educational trust was finalized within a week. I received an email notification when the funds were transferred, the account established, the paperwork complete. That evening, I wrote Emma a heartfelt letter explaining how the trust would work, expressing my pride in her accomplishments, and encouraging her to pursue her dreams without financial worry. I ended the letter with words I'd been turning over, in my mind for days. "Trust your journey, even when the path isn't clear. The most beautiful gardens often grow from unexpected seeds." I mailed the letter with the trust documents to Emma directly, not through Elaine. Another small act of independence, of acknowledging Emma as her own person separate from her mother's influence. 3 days later, on a Sunday afternoon, as I was repotting an African violet Jean had given me, the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw Elaine's car in the driveway, but it was Emma who stood on the porch, alone. When I opened the door, she threw her arms around me with adolescent enthusiasm, nearly knocking me off balance. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she bubbled, squeezing me tight. "I got your letter and the trust papers. Grandma, I can't believe you did this. For me." I hugged her back, surprised and delighted by her presence. Over her shoulder, I noticed Elaine sitting in the car, watching us but making no move to approach the house. I ushered Emma inside, offering her lemonade and the oatmeal cookies I'd baked the day before. As she settled at the kitchen table, I glanced out the window again. Elaine was still there, head bowed now as if looking at her phone. "Your mother brought you?" I asked, setting a plate of cookies in front of Emma. Emma nodded, her expression growing more serious. "She wanted to come in too, but I told her I needed to talk to you alone first." "About the trust?" "Partly." She took a cookie but didn't bite into it, turning it over in her fingers instead. She cried when I showed her the papers. Not sad crying exactly. More like, I don't know, relief mixed with shame, maybe? She said she didn't deserve for you to help me after what she did. I sat down across from her, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "Mom's been different lately," Emma said finally. "Going to therapy twice a week. She and Dad had this huge fight about money and priorities. She actually said to him, right in front of me, that she was ashamed of how they'd treated you, that it made her sick to think about it." I tried to imagine Elaine saying such things, standing up to Thomas, acknowledging her actions so bluntly. It didn't fit with the daughter I thought I knew. Or perhaps it fit with a version of her I hadn't seen in a very long time. Does she know you're telling me this? I asked. Emma nodded. She said I could tell you anything I wanted to, that she deserves whatever you think of her. She finally took a bite of cookie, chewing thoughtfully. I think she's really trying, Grandma. And I think maybe Dad was more behind what happened than we realized. Some of the stuff I overheard during their fight. She trailed off, suddenly looking every bit her 17 years, uncomfortable with being caught between adult conflicts. You don't need to be the messenger, Emma, I assured her gently. That's not your job. I know. She straightened her shoulders. But I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing for me, and I'm not going to let anyone mess with it or with you. I made that super clear to both of them. Pride surged through me at her strength, her clear-eyed perspective. You're going to do remarkable things, Emma. She grinned, the serious moment passing. Starting with marine biology in Florida. I still can't believe I get to spend the summer with sea turtles. We chatted for another hour about her plans, about Princeton, about the novels she was reading and the music she was listening to. Normal grandmother-granddaughter conversation, blessedly free of tension or ulterior motives. As our visit wound down, Emma glanced out the window. Mom's still waiting. Would it be okay if she came in? Just for a minute? I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but just her, not Thomas. Emma texted Elaine, and a few minutes later there was a tentative knock at the door. I opened it to find my daughter standing there, looking smaller somehow, uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, facing consequences for breaking a neighbor's window with an errant softball. Hello, Mom, she said softly. Elaine. I stepped aside to let her in, leading her to the living room where Emma waited. Elaine perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for what you're doing for Emma. It's incredibly generous, especially after... She trailed off, swallowing hard. It's not about you, I said plainly. It's about Emma and her future. I know. And it should have been about Emma all along, not about... She stopped herself, glancing at her daughter. Emma stood. I'm going to check out Grandma's garden while you two talk, she announced, slipping out the back door with the instinctive tact of someone who had grown up navigating adults' complicated emotions. When she was gone, Elaine took a deep breath. I'm in therapy, she said abruptly. Twice a week, like Emma probably told you. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. Why I lied. Why I tried to take control of your life. I said nothing, waiting. The therapist says I have control issues stemming from childhood insecurities. That I've been trying to manage my anxiety by controlling everyone around me, especially the people I love. She gave a hollow laugh. Apparently, I've been doing it for years without realizing how toxic it had become. And Thomas? I asked, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Elaine's expression tightened. Thomas and I are reevaluating our relationship. He moved out last month. He was the one who pushed hardest for getting control of your assets, but I was a willing participant. I can't blame him entirely. I considered her words, searching for signs of the same manipulation that had characterized our previous interactions. But there was a rawness to her now, a lack of the polished persuasiveness I'd come to distrust. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued when I didn't speak. I don't know if I could, in your position. But I wanted you to know that I'm working on myself, trying to be better. For Emma's sake, for my own sake, and yes, for any relationship you might be willing to have with me in the future. And the recordings? I asked. How do you feel about those now? She winced visibly. Humiliated, exposed, but also grateful in a weird way. They forced me to confront what I was doing, what I was becoming. Without that evidence, I might have kept lying. To you, to the family, to myself. There was truth in that, I thought. Sometimes it takes an irrefutable mirror to show us our own faces clearly. I'm not ready to trust you yet, I said honestly. But I appreciate your honesty today. It's a start. She nodded, blinking back tears. That's more than I deserve. Emma came back inside then, her timing impeccable, breaking the emotional tension with cheerful observations about the garden and questions about various plants. We shifted to safer topics: Emma's upcoming graduation, the research she was excited to begin, books we'd both read recently. As they prepared to leave, Elaine hesitated at the door. Would it be all right if I called you sometime? Just to talk? I considered her request carefully. Yes, I decided. But let's start slowly. Maybe once every couple of weeks. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. After they left, I sat on the porch swing Richard had built when we first moved in, gently rocking back and forth as twilight settled over the neighborhood. Fireflies began to appear, pinpricks of light dancing above the lawn, here and then gone, here and then gone. I thought about second chances and whether Elaine truly deserved one. I thought about the evidence I had gathered, the recordings that had protected me, the clarity they had brought to a situation muddied by manipulation and lies. The truth had set me free in its way. Perhaps it was beginning to free Elaine too, forcing her to confront aspects of herself she had denied or justified for too long. Or perhaps this was just another performance, another attempt to regain access to what she wanted. Time would tell. And this time, I would be watching closely, my eyes open, my boundaries firm. In the weeks that followed, Elaine called as suggested, once every 2 weeks. Our conversations were tentative at first, carefully circling around neutral topics: Emma's achievements, news from extended family, the unusually beautiful summer weather. Gradually, as Emma's high school graduation approached, the calls became more substantive. Elaine shared insights from her therapy, acknowledged patterns of behavior she was working to change, asked for my perspective on situations from our shared past. I remained cautious but engaged, willing to listen without immediately accepting every statement at face value. Trust, I had learned, was not an all-or-nothing proposition. It could be extended in measured amounts, tested in small ways before risking more. Emma's graduation ceremony took place on a perfect June day, the kind Richard would have called a day borrowed from heaven. I sat in the auditorium several rows away from Elaine and Thomas, who arrived separately and sat stiffly beside each other. As Emma walked across the stage to receive her diploma, her honor cords swinging, I felt a rush of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. She had navigated the troubled waters of her parents' marriage, their financial difficulties, and their ethical failings with remarkable grace. She was headed for Princeton with her future wide open, supported by the trust I had established. "She's amazing," Jean whispered beside me. My sister had insisted on attending to support both Emma and me. You did good, helping make that possible. I just provided the means, I murmured back. She did all the hard work herself. After the ceremony, during the reception in the school gymnasium, Elaine approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. Emma wants some family photos, she said. Would you mind? I agreed, and we posed together beside Emma, me, Elaine, Thomas, Jean, even Howard and Deborah, who had driven in from Columbus. A constellation of family members orbiting around the bright star of Emma's achievement. Thank you for coming, Grandma, Emma said afterward, hugging me tightly. It means everything to have you here. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, I assured her. As the reception wound down, Elaine approached me again. Mom, I've been thinking about Emma's visit to you before she goes to Florida. I was wondering, would it be okay if I helped her move in? Just for the day, not staying overnight or anything. I recognized this for what it was. Another small test of our rebuilding relationship. Another opportunity for Elaine to demonstrate respect for my boundaries. That would be fine, I agreed. We can have lunch together, the three of us. Relief softened her features. Thank you. That evening, back at home, I added a new recording to my collection. Not a secret documentation of manipulation or lies, but an intentional preservation of a precious moment. I sat at my desk and spoke clearly into my phone. Emma's graduation, June 12th. She looked radiant, confident, ready for whatever comes next. Elaine and I managed civility, even warmth. Small steps toward healing. Richard would have been so proud of his granddaughter today. I felt him there with us, in the sunlight streaming through the windows, in Emma's smile that's so like his. I saved the recording in a new folder labeled Memories Worth Keeping. Then I went out to the garden and cut a bouquet of hydrangeas, the blue ones Richard had said matched my eyes, and placed them in a vase on my bedside table. Life would continue to have its complications. Elaine and I had a long road ahead if we were to truly rebuild trust. Thomas remained a wild card whose influence on my daughter I still didn't fully trust. The wider family was healing but still carried the scars of divided loyalties and damaged trust. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. There was progress. There was the knowledge that I had stood up for myself when it mattered most, had gathered the evidence I needed, had protected what was mine to protect. The recordings that had once been my shield were now becoming something else. A chronicle of a difficult passage, yes, but also potentially the foundation for something new, something truer, something built on clearer vision and stronger boundaries. As I drifted toward sleep, surrounded by the scent of hydrangeas, I found myself planning the garden projects I would share with Emma during her stay. The perennial border, that needed dividing. The new rose trellis I wanted to build. The herb garden I'd been considering for the sunny spot near the kitchen window. Seeds to plant. Growth to nurture. A future to cultivate. Not despite what had happened, but because of it. Because sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most challenging conditions. From the compost of what was broken down to feed what comes next. Emma arrived on a Tuesday morning in early July. Her small Honda packed to the ceiling with clothes, books, and the specialized equipment she'd need for her marine biology internship. I stood on the porch, watching her maneuver into the driveway, remembering how Richard had taught her to parallel park just 2 summers ago, his patience endless as she repeatedly inched too close to the curb. "Grandma!" She bounded up the steps and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of coconut shampoo and the coffee she'd clearly been drinking on the drive. I made it in record time. Did you stop at all? I asked, pretending sternness while ushering. Her inside. It's a 3-hour drive. Once for gas and bathroom, she admitted with a grin. And maybe I went a little over the speed limit on that empty stretch of highway. I shook my head but couldn't suppress a smile. Her vitality filled my quiet house like sunshine pouring through newly opened curtains. Your mother texted that she'll be here around noon to help unload your things. I've made a quiche for lunch. Emma nodded, momentarily distracted by the changes in my living room. You rearranged everything, and is that a new laptop? Yes to both, I confirmed, leading her toward the back of the house. I decided the old furniture arrangement was blocking too much natural light, and the laptop is for video calls with you while you're in Florida. Jean helped me set it up. The real reason for the rearranged furniture was more practical. I'd created clearer pathways, removed trip hazards, and positioned everything to accommodate my aging body's occasional stiffness. But I'd also embraced the opportunity to freshen the space, to make it more explicitly mine rather than a museum to the life Richard and I had shared. I love it, Emma declared, running her fingers along the spines of the books I'd arranged, by color on the newly installed floating shelves. It feels more you. I smiled at her perceptiveness. That's exactly what I was going for. I showed her to the guest room, which I'd prepared with fresh linens and a small vase of garden, flowers on the nightstand. The room had once been Elaine's, its pale blue walls now the only remnant of its original decor. Everything else had been updated over the decades as the room transitioned from a child sanctuary to a teenager's domain to an occasional guest room and finally to this current iteration, a bright, simple space designed for comfort rather than sentiment. I put extra towels in the bathroom, I told her, and there's space cleared in the closet for whatever you want to hang up. Make yourself at home. Thanks, Grandma. This is perfect. We spent the next hour chatting as Emma unpacked the essentials and I finished preparing lunch. She bubbled with excitement about her upcoming internship, about the professors she'd corresponded with at Princeton, about the research papers she'd been reading to prepare. They're doing groundbreaking work on sea turtle migration patterns, she explained, chopping bell peppers for the salad with the confidence of someone who had spent time in kitchens. The tracking devices they've developed are so much smaller and less intrusive than previous models. It could revolutionize how we monitor endangered marine species. I listened, asking questions when appropriate, but mostly just enjoying her. Enthusiasm. Emma had always been this way, laser-focused on her interests, able to dive deep into subjects that captured her imagination. In this, she reminded me of Richard, who could spend hours researching the optimal structural design for a bridge or the historical development of urban planning principles. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. Elaine stood on the porch, wearing a simple sundress and carrying a small potted orchid. "Hi, Mom," she said, offering me the plant. "I saw this and thought of you. It's the same kind you had in your office, at the library." The gesture caught me off guard. It was thoughtful in a specific way, showing attention to detail and memory of my preferences. The old Elaine, the one focused on control and manipulation, would have brought something grander, more obviously expensive, designed to impress or obligate. "Thank you," I said, accepting the orchid and stepping back to let her in. "It's lovely." Emma bounded down the hallway. "Mom, come see my room. And Grandma made quiche for lunch, the one with the really good crust." Elaine followed her daughter, exchanging a slightly awkward smile with me as she passed. I carried the orchid to the kitchen, examining its delicate white blooms. It was indeed the same variety I'd kept in my library office for years. Phalaenopsis Aphrodite, commonly known as the moth orchid. Richard had given me my first one on our 25th anniversary, and I'd maintained a succession of them until retirement. That Elaine remembered this detail felt significant, a small tender thread in the complex tapestry of our relationship. Lunch progressed with surprising ease. Emma's presence acted as a buffer, her enthusiasm creating natural conversation topics that kept us from awkward silences or tense undercurrents. Elaine was different too, less assertive, more attentive, asking questions rather than making declarations. After the meal, we all pitched in to unload Emma's car, forming a human chain, to transfer boxes and bags to her room. As we worked, I noticed Elaine pausing occasionally to study the changes I'd made to the house. The new bookshelves, the rearranged furniture, the updated kitchen appliances. "You've done a lot with the place," she commented as we folded empty boxes in the living room. "It looks good." "Thank you," I replied. It was time for some changes. She nodded, then hesitated before adding, "You know, I realize now how presumptuous it was for me to push you to sell this house. It's your home. You've made it exactly what you want it to be." The acknowledgement hung in the air between us, simple but weighty. I didn't rush to absolve her or minimize the hurt her actions had caused. Instead, I simply nodded. "Yes, it is my home, and I'm happy here." Emma called from the other room, asking for help organizing her research materials, and the moment passed. But something had shifted, a small step toward genuine understanding rather than perfunctory reconciliation. Later, as Elaine prepared to leave, she lingered on the porch. "Mom, I've been meaning to tell you something. Thomas and I are divorcing." "I suspected things were heading that way," I said carefully. "Are you doing all right?" She gave a wry smile. "Better than I expected, actually. It's been coming for a long time. We want different things. He's still focused on appearances, on impressing his family, on maintaining a certain lifestyle, even if it means cutting ethical corners." She glanced toward the house where Emma was sorting through her clothes. "I don't want to be that person anymore, and I definitely don't want that example for Emma." I studied my daughter's face, seeing both familiar features and new expressions. There was a steadiness in her eyes that reminded me of the child she'd been before teenage insecurities and adult ambitions had reshaped her. "Change isn't easy," I observed, "but sometimes it's necessary." "Like your recordings," she said unexpectedly. "They forced a change I didn't want but needed." I tensed slightly at the direct reference to the evidence I'd gathered against her. We hadn't spoken about the recordings since our confrontation months ago. "I'm not bringing that up to make you uncomfortable," she added quickly. I've been thinking about it a lot in therapy. About why I reacted with such anger and shame when I found out you'd been recording me. And I realized it wasn't really about the recordings themselves. It was about being seen clearly for what I was doing, having no place to hide from the truth. I considered her words. There's power in evidence, in irrefutable truth. Yes. She nodded emphatically. And even though it was painful, humiliating, really, I'm grateful for it now. It was like lancing a boil. Awful in the moment, but necessary for healing. The metaphor was startlingly apt. I thought of the recordings still stored safely in multiple locations, evidence I had gathered to protect myself, never imagining they might ultimately help Elaine, too. "I should go," she said, glancing at her watch. "I promised Emma I wouldn't hover during her visit. But Mom, thank you for today, for letting me be part of this." As her car disappeared down the street, I returned inside to find Emma sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by scientific journals and color-coded notebooks. "Everything okay with Mom?" she asked, looking up from her reading. "I think so," I said truthfully. "She seems different." Emma nodded sagely. "She is different. The divorce stuff is hard, but it's also good for her, I think. She's remembering who she was before Dad and all his family pressure." She turned a page in her journal. "Plus, the therapy is helping. She actually apologizes now when she gets controlling. It's weird, but nice." I smiled at her succinct assessment. "How do you feel about the divorce?" She considered the question seriously, setting down her highlighter. "Relieved, mostly. They haven't been happy together for a long time. Dad's always stressed about money and status. Mom was turning into someone I didn't like very much, trying to please him and his family." She shrugged. "Maybe now they can both figure out what actually makes them happy instead of just chasing what they think they should want." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Or rather, out of the mouth of this remarkable young woman who saw with clarity what had taken her mother decades to recognize. The next 2 weeks passed in a gentle rhythm of shared meals, garden work, and quiet evenings. Emma spent mornings studying scientific papers and reviewing protocols for her upcoming research. I tended to household tasks and volunteer commitments. In the afternoons, we often worked together in the garden, Emma's young strength complementing my experience as we tackled projects I'd been postponing. We rebuilt the rose trellis that had partially collapsed during winter storms. We divided perennials that had grown too crowded, sharing the extras with Harriet next door. We installed a small water feature in the shady corner beneath the oak tree, a simple bubbling fountain that attracted birds and created a peaceful soundtrack for summer evenings on the porch. "Grandpa would love this," Emma commented one afternoon as we sat in Adirondack chairs, drinking iced tea and admiring our handiwork. "He always said gardens should engage all the senses." He did say that, I agreed, touched by her memory of Richard's philosophy. He believed strongly in creating spaces that invited you to linger, to notice details, to be fully present. "That's what I love about marine biology," she mused. "When you're underwater, studying a coral reef or following a sea turtle, you have to be completely present. You notice everything. The way light filters through water, the patterns of fish movement, the subtle changes in current. There's no room for distraction." Her insight struck me as profound. "Your grandfather would say you've found your calling then." She smiled. "I think I have." On the evenings when Emma wasn't video chatting with friends or working on her research summaries, we established a new tradition, recording family stories. It began casually, with Emma asking about a black and white photograph of Richard's parents that sat on my desk. "I don't know much about my great-grandparents," she said. "What were they like?" I told her about Richard's father, a carpenter, who could identify any wood by smell alone, and his mother, who made quilts so meticulously constructed that museums now displayed them. I described their small house in rural Pennsylvania, the garden where they grew most of their own food, the work ethic they instilled in their children. "We should record these stories," Emma suggested impulsively. "Not secretly or anything," she added hastily, clearly mindful of the history with recordings in our family. but intentionally, like an oral history project. So we began. Each evening, Emma would set up her laptop with a simple recording program, and I would share memories of my childhood during the post-war boom years, of meeting Richard at a community square dance, of the early struggles and joys of our marriage, of Elaine as a bright, curious child. "Tell me about when Mom was my age," Emma prompted one evening. "Was she like me?" I considered the question carefully. In some ways, she was brilliant academically, like you, but she was more concerned with appearances even then, more influenced by what others thought of her. "Why do you think that was?" "Partly personality, I suppose, but also circumstances. She grew up in a time and place where conformity was highly valued. Richard and I tried to encourage independence, but the culture around her pulled strongly in the other direction." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think that's part of why she got so caught up in what Grandpa Thomas's family thought of her? Why she was willing to?" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable directly referencing what had happened between Elaine and me. "Possibly," I acknowledged. "When you spend your life seeking validation from others, it can be hard to develop a strong internal compass. Easy to justify actions that don't align with your values if they seem necessary for approval." "I don't want to be like that," Emma said firmly. "I don't think you are," I assured her. "You seem to know your own mind very clearly." She smiled, pleased by my assessment. "I think that's because of you, actually. You've always treated me like my opinions matter. You ask questions instead of just telling me what to think." Her words warmed me deeply. If nothing else in my life had gone right, helping shape this thoughtful young woman would have been achievement enough. The oral history project expanded as the days passed. Emma began including photographs, scanning old family albums to accompany my stories. She created a simple website accessible only to family members, organizing the recordings by theme, by time period, by subject. "This is important," she explained as she showed me the structure she'd created. "Not just for me, but for whoever comes after, for the family's future." The family's future. Such a simple phrase, but it carried immense weight. Despite the fractures and betrayals we'd experienced, there was still a future to consider, still connections worth preserving and strengthening. Midway through Emma's stay, Elaine called to ask if she could join us for dinner. "Just for the evening," she clarified. "I have some news I'd like to share with both of you together." I agreed, curious about what she wanted to discuss. Emma helped me prepare a simple meal of grilled chicken, summer vegetables from my garden, and a blueberry cobbler for dessert. When Elaine arrived, she brought a bottle of Chardonnay and a stack of folders. We ate on the back patio, the evening air still warm but softened by a gentle breeze. The conversation flowed easily, focused on Emma's preparations for Florida and my recent volunteer work digitizing historical documents for the library. After dinner, as we lingered over dessert and coffee, Elaine placed the folders on the table. "I wanted to show you both something," she said, opening the top one to reveal legal documents. "These are the final divorce papers. Everything's settled." "That was quick," I observed, surprised by the apparent lack of conflict in what I had expected to be a contentious process. Elaine nodded. "Thomas didn't fight it. I think he was as ready to end things as I was." She pulled out another document. "This is more relevant to both of you. I've had my name removed from all the paperwork related to Emma's educational trust. It now flows directly from you to her, Mom, with no possibility of me or Thomas interfering." I studied her face, looking for signs of the old Elaine, resentment, calculation, hidden agenda. I found none, just a calm resolve and perhaps a touch of sadness. You didn't need to do that, I said. The trust was already structured to prevent redirection of funds. I know, but I wanted to make my intentions absolutely clear. No more control, no more manipulation, not even the appearance of it. She turned to Emma. Your future is yours, sweetheart. And your relationship with your grandmother is yours too, independent of me or your father. Emma reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. Thanks, Mom. Elaine then opened the third folder, revealing photographs of a small cottage surrounded by pine trees. And this is my news. I've purchased a place of my own. It's about 40 minutes from here, in Cedar Grove. 2 bedrooms, just enough space for me and for Emma when she visits. It's lovely, I said, genuinely impressed by both the cottage itself and what it represented. Elaine's first truly independent home, chosen without Thomas's influence or financial entanglements. I start a new job next month, she continued. Nothing glamorous, administrative work at the community college, but it's steady, with good benefits, and it will allow me to be self-sufficient. She smiled. I'm going back to basics, I guess. Building a simpler life. Emma beamed. I'm proud of you, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart. Elaine's eyes glistened briefly before she blinked away the emotion. I'm trying to take a page from your grandmother's book, creating a life that's authentic and independent, not defined by other people's expectations. Her words caught me by surprise. I had never thought of myself as a model of independence, particularly after Richard died. But seeing myself through Elaine's eyes, I recognized the truth in her assessment. I had built a life that reflected my values, had maintained my autonomy, even when pressured to surrender it, had found purpose and meaning on my own terms. The realization settled into my bones like a profound confirmation. All these months, I had been focused on what I had lost or might have lost. My home, my assets, my dignity. But in protecting those things, I had also affirmed something essential about who I was and who I wanted to be. The cottage has a nice garden space, Elaine added, showing us more photographs. Nothing like yours, Mom, but good bones. I'm hoping you might give me some advice about what to plant. The invitation, to share knowledge, to connect through a shared interest, felt genuine. I'd be happy to, I replied. Perhaps when Emma leaves for Florida, we could visit a nursery together, pick out some starter plants. Elaine's face brightened. I'd like that very much. After she left, Emma helped me clear the dishes, unusually quiet as we worked side by side at the sink. What are you thinking? I asked finally. She considered the question, rinsing a plate with careful attention. I'm thinking that people can change, really change, I mean, not just pretend to for a while. She placed the plate in the drying rack. And I'm thinking that recording was the right thing to do, even though it hurt a lot of people in the short term. I dried my hands on a dish towel, turning to face her fully. It was a hard decision, not one I made lightly. I know. She leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older than her 17 years. But it was brave. Most people would have just given in, would have convinced themselves it was easier to go along with what Mom and Dad wanted. You stood up for yourself, for your right to make your own choices. Her insight humbled me. I had a lot of support. Jean, Howard, Paul Hendricks. But you were the one who gathered the evidence, who made sure the truth couldn't be denied or explained away. She smiled somewhat wryly. You know, in science, that's what we do. Gather evidence, test hypotheses, document results meticulously. You use the scientific method on your own family drama. I laughed at her framing. I suppose I did, in a way. It worked, she said, simply. And now everyone's better for it. Mom's building a life that's actually hers. I'm going to college without financial stress. You're safe in your home. Even Dad might eventually figure out what actually matters. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat on the porch swing in the darkness, listening to the gentle bubbling of our new fountain and the chorus of crickets performing their nightly symphony. I thought about evidence and truth, about recordings that captured reality in undeniable form. The recordings I'd made to protect myself had accomplished their purpose. They had safeguarded my autonomy, corrected false narratives about my mental capacity, preserved my financial security. But they had done something else too, something I hadn't anticipated. They had created an opportunity for genuine change, for honest reckoning with unhealthy patterns, for the possibility of healthier relationships built on truth rather than manipulation. Evidence could be a weapon or a mirror. Mine had been both, defending me while forcing Elaine to see herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. The oral history project Emma and I had undertaken was another kind of evidence. Not of wrongdoing, but of connection, of continuity, of the complex tapestry of experiences that shaped a family across generations. Those recordings would outlast any conflict, would carry forward stories that might otherwise be lost to time. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the recording app, no longer feeling the need to hide it or use it secretly. In the quiet darkness, I spoke softly. July 18th. Emma leaves for Florida in 3 days. The house will be quieter without her, but I'll carry the memories of these weeks like polished stones in my pocket, smooth, precious, comforting to touch. Elaine is changing in ways I wouldn't have believed possible 6 months ago. I'm cautiously optimistic, though still watchful. The trust we lost can't be rebuilt overnight. But there's progress, genuine progress. And most importantly, Emma is flourishing, charting her own course with clarity and purpose. The recordings that once served as my defense have evolved into something different, a family archive, a legacy of stories and experiences for future generations. Evidence not just of what went wrong, but of how we tried to make it right. Of how truth, painful as it sometimes is, can ultimately set us free if we're brave enough to face it. Richard would be proud, I think. Not just of me for standing my ground, but of all of us for finding our way back to something authentic, something worth preserving. I saved the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Above me, stars punctured the darkness, constant and bright. Below, the garden Richard and I had planted together continued to grow, shaped now by new hands, evolving with each season. Evidence of life continuing, of strength where there had been vulnerability, of growth where there had been damage, of truth prevailing, not as a weapon, but as a foundation upon which to build whatever might come next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.